Welcome to Connecting Chats Christmas special. Today we're very honored to have the brilliant South African composer, percussionist, poet and educationalist Eugene Skeef. From anti-apartheid activism to poetry in COVID times, Eugene's going to be teaching us how everything and everyone is connected. Enjoy! Okay, we are definitely live now with the brilliant Eugene Skeef. Hello, Eugene. How are you doing?
Hey, hello, Fernando. I'm very well, my brother, and I hope the same for you. I'm well and safe and very happy and excited at the opportunity of talking with you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much for coming to our Connecting Chats. This is, as you can imagine, everybody watching now is a proper Christmas special with brilliant Eugene Skeef. Has so many stories and so much experience to enlighten us today. So happy you are here. A very kind of a tradition for our Connecting Chats, Eugene, here is that we start just by saying about your background in music specifically, but you can talk about other things from where you're from, where you grew up, how did music come into your life, and how did you start playing and singing and doing things musically.
Okay, I'll start right at the beginning. I was born in a township. I'm from South Africa, of course, but I was born in a very particular township that was called Claremont Township. Claremont, Clermont, in South Africa, near the Indian Ocean, so on the eastern part of South Africa. And the main city that was that the township was attached to is called Durban. And inside my township, the section that I grew up in, that I was born in, is called Indundum. And even by the sound of the word, the name of the place, Indundum, it has thunderous qualities, dum dum, like the dun dun drum, the bass drum, but also like the sound of thunder. So Indundum can be considered as an idiophone, like a word that suggests a sound, and that sound means like Indunduma, duma, ukduma, to duma in my language, Zulu, my first language, to duma is to thunder. So I was born and I grew up in a township that was embraced, that was in a nest of thunderous hills, hills that thundered. And so as a child, it's very hot where I come from, very warm, and it doesn't cost much to reach in the summer, to reach 35 or 40 degrees Celsius, really, really sweltering heat. And the one relief is that the breeze, the sea breeze from the Indian Ocean from the east comes and sort of, floats over the township. And that was one way of keeping cool, is being outside and receiving the breeze. But also what happened in my growing up was that, I don't know if you've heard of frogs that come out of the sky. It rained the kind of rain that rains frogs, toads and frogs.
Yeah.
And there's a scientific explanation for that, but we didn't know it. The frogs get swirled up and then they come back down from the heavens, from the sky as part of the rain. So that happened for real. And I didn't know the scientific explanation as a kid, but that was dramatic. The other thing that happened was that termites, flying ants, flying termites used to come out in their millions when that kind of weather happens in that season of the rainstorms. And as children, we would run around naked, and because the rain would steam off our bodies. The instant the rain hits you and you get wet, that very same second, you are steaming off, and the vapor, the rain is evaporating off you because the weather is so hot, the sun is so hot. and we would catch the termites. We would run around naked and catch the termites, the flying termites, the flying ants for our mother, because our mother, they were high in protein. And our mother used to roast them on an English cooker, a stove, you know, the old fashioned cold and wooden coal stove, the black one that was called Welcome Dover, a bit like the Arga that is fashionable in the UK. You know, a lot of middle class English people like to feel like they're in the country, even when they're in the city, by buying an Arga, you know. So we had a smaller version of that called Welcome Dover. And my mom would put the flying ants after we had caught them as kids, caught them and put them in a bowl. We'd run up to her and then she would fry them on the cooker. And that's what we would eat sometimes as a snack, you know, like you have crisps, yeah, but that would be our snack. We didn't have crisps when I was growing up, or couldn't afford them anyway. And so that's the kind of environment that you must imagine as I talk about my growing up. And then, but before we took the termites, the flying ants, to my mother, we used to just pluck the wings and eat them raw as we're catching them, you know, because they were healthy and they tasted good. But of course, a London kid would not consider that a kind of good taste. But for us, it was like, wow, it was, you know, really delicious. And the termites were so many that if you're driving a car and you're using the windscreen wipers to get them off, you would fail. All you would succeed to do was to get all the oil and the fat on your windscreen, and then, you know, you wouldn't see and you'd have to stop and use other methods of cleaning them. So that's what I grew up in, you know. And so nature was my refuge, you know. I've written about this, and this is going into my memoir. My first experience of symphonic music, my first orchestral music, my first symphonies were the sounds of nature, the sounds of the birds, you know, the sounds of the monkeys, because every day I lived in a very violent, poor township, you know. Some of the men were aggressive towards us, and of course there was the violence. The men were aggressive to the women and children, because they felt emasculated by the apartheid racist regime. So the violence and aggression of the system, you know, of the racist system, the men would take it out on the more vulnerable, which invariably were women and children. So we spent a lot of time running away from the streets, on the streets, but we'd go into the bushes, and that's where we would catch birds. We would listen to the birds making their sounds, and we would imitate, you know, the bird sounds, you know. And I was one of the best kids at emulating or imitating the sounds of the birds and the monkeys, you know. And then there'd be the rain. So when we are indoors and it's raining too hard to be outside, we had a zinc or metal corrugated iron roof, no ceiling. And the roof was rotten, so there were many holes of different sizes in the roof, in the corrugated iron roof. And my job as with the water dripping. So my job as the firstborn, as soon as the rain starts like that and they are thunderous and tumultuous, I had to run to a special corner in the kitchen and collect all the cans, you know, metal cans, plastic buckets, cans, you know, containers of different sizes and different materials, and get my siblings to run around the house and place the containers directly underneath a hole where the water was dripping from. And because the tins and the plastic buckets were different sizes and different materials, and the holes in the roof were different sizes, the dropping of the water would be different pitches. So we'd have different pitches, and the sequence, the series of drops would be different rhythms. So there'd be different intervals, there'd be different pitches, there'd be different rhythmic cycles.
Time signatures.
And different time signatures, exactly. So as a child, that was my first experience, you know, that and the sounds of nature outside. So outside was nature. Inside my house was the sound of the rain that we were catching. And those were my first symphonic sounds. So I started composing music even as a 5, 6 year old. You know, I was hearing these sounds and going, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all my youth, you know, because we were poor. And that became my music. And then when I went to sleep, just before I closed my eyes, I would cup my ears and then do like, wow, wow, you know, open and close my ears like that. And that would create like a wah-wah sound, you know, like the wah-wah, you know?
Yeah.
You know, the guitar pedal wah-wah. That would be my symphonic, you know, and stuff. So that was my first music. But and then that went to another level. My mother, who was a health visitor of the Western kind, a nurse, a sister, and a midwife who cycled and delivered babies around the township, but she was also a healer of the African type, using herbs and divination. So she was a bit like myself. She had the Western and African thing, happening. She had a foot in each camp, and I saw her cycling off to go and deliver. She delivered most of us. I was delivered by her herself,
Wow.
and she sent my father to boil the water. She cut the umbilical cord. She did that for most of her kids, so anyway, two important things about my mother was, my mother was this healer. So in our home, we lived in this violent township that I've just described to you. And our home was open door in this violent place where normally you have to lock your doors. Our home had an open door for two reasons. Number one was my father was the biggest man. His nickname was Bubesi, which is Zulu for lion. He was an immensely big man, but a very beautiful man who protected the most vulnerable. As a youth, as a teenager, my father wrestled oxen on the farm, his mother, my grandmother's farm, where we used to go for holidays. And that's where Lady Smith Black Mambazo comes from. You know the group called Lady Smith Black Mambazo?
Of course.
The a cappella group, yeah?
Yeah,
they're very famous. Their roots are from the same valley where my father comes from. So they knew my dad.
Wow.
And when they make those sounds, when they go, and then, when they're on stage, when they're dancing, all those sounds are the sounds that boys who are cow herds, the boys that herd the cattle, those are the sounds they make to the cows, because those sounds, that's a very deep thing I'm telling you right now. Those sounds are the sounds that tell the cow, that makes the cow dance. It's like a choreographic sound. It's a choreography. So the herd boys are choreographers. They make the sounds that tell the cow which way to tilt when they're plowing, when it's pulling the plow. When they're herding the cattle in the fields. And so when you go, jamlut, whatever, you tell the cow will do that. And it's not normally, it's not really literal language, it's spiritual sort of musical, deeper vibrational language. You understand me?
Yeah.
So my father was the best. My father was the best at that as a young man in the same valley that the Lady Smith Black Mambazo came from. So when he was sent to the shop by his mother, my grandmother, with the ox once a month to go and get the groceries for the month in the countryside, very far. And then when he's coming back and the rivers are flooded, the oxen were scared to cross. So my father would make those sounds and then wrestle with them. Literally, he was a real hunk of a man, and beautiful. And then he'd cross over. Now, fast forward to when he was now my father, when he's a man living in this township. So two important things. Our home was the safest home from the gangsters. There were marauding gangsters, and then there were the gangsters who were the police and soldiers of the racist apartheid regime. So our house was the one house that no one dares to do naughty stuff at. No gangsters come. They park their guns or machetes at the edge of the road. If they want to come, they wanted to be with my dad because he was a fascinating character.
Crazy.
Number two was that my mother, as the healer, healed all the kids and the cats and the dogs and cats that were run over by bicycles and motorbikes and cars. My mother would work on them and bring them back to life. So my home, when I was growing up as a young lad, was the destination, was the principal destination of everybody in the township. So the Lady Smith Black Mambazo in the 60s used to rehearse in my house because it was the safest house, because they knew my dad. In the 60s, I used to sit. I have an interview that I did for the BBC, because I used to do radio programs once our country became free and Mandela was the president, where I have an interview with Joseph Shabalala, the leader, who, when he recognized who I was, he got so excited, the mics and the cameras all dropped. The producer, they got a fright because he got so excited that he crushed me with excitement because he remembers that, because he loves my dad so much. My dad's late now, and the leader of the group just died, some months ago. But he was so he was so excited that I am the son of the man that he looked up to. And I was at the home and I sat on his lap as a young lad when he was waiting for my dad to return after the rehearsal, because they rehearsed in my house because it was safe and the gangsters would not harass them. You know, there was a lot of violence, as I say.
Yeah.
So when he finished rehearsing and the rest of the group has gone home, he would stay in my home waiting for, my father had a polygamist, had 7 wives. I'm the firstborn of 47 kids. You know, my mother was the number one wife. Yeah. So when he comes back from the other 6 homes, coming back, you know, visiting all the mothers, when he comes to my home, the number 1 home, Joseph Shabalala would hope that on returning, my dad would just brush against him. You know, like a bit like when Michael Jackson used to kiss his fans on the hand or the cheeks, and then they wouldn't wash for days because Michael Jackson has kissed them. With my dad, it was a similar thing, that if he just rubbed against Joseph Shabalala or touched him, and he would think, wow, the lion has touched me, you know. So that was my upbringing. And then because of my mother, then a lot of the kids from abused families came to my home and ended up there. So 24/7, there was always something to eat or drink. And then because our home became like a safe haven, you know. So that was my first experience of my mother, if you like, or my first experience of the kind of workshop that I happened to then take into exile. When I was already in exile, I'll come back to that, in England, where I am now, in London, Arts Council England, what used to be called the Arts Council of England in the old days, they started calling my kitchen Eugene's kitchen, my kitchen in London, in Clapham Common, because my kitchen became famous, because in my kitchen, I'm jumping forward, in my kitchen, musicians like, you know Pharoah Sanders, the saxophone player from the States, who played with John Coltrane. You know John Coltrane?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Of course, you know John Coltrane. One of John Coltrane's friends who influenced John Coltrane is called Pharoah Sanders. He's got a lot of gray hair, he wears shades, he's got a long beard. He's my personal friend because of Begim Selego, my best friend, the South African pianist, multi-instrumentalist, who died in 2008. I brought him out in exile when I came to exile. Because Pharoah Sanders was his friend. And then there's another guy called Steve Coleman, who's an African-American saxophone player who plays with Anthony Tidd, who's a UK-born, a London-born guy who lives in the States and worked with the Roots and Black Eyed Peas and so forth. What used to happen is that famous musicians would come to the Royal Festival Hall, Queen Elizabeth Hall, Jazz Cafe, Ronnie Scott's, places like that. And then at the end of the gig, they'd be bored because if you know, I think you know what I'm talking about, you know, most jazz musicians, most creative musicians, at the end of the gig, they're only getting warm, you know, because it's improvised music, you know, and then they want to play. So rather than go back to their boring hotel, they used to come to my kitchen in Clapham Common. And then they would stay up the whole night. I would cook food, or Beggy and I would go to our Pakistani restaurant, our favorite restaurant, and get a takeaway. And then there'd be music made all night. My udus, people would play my udus. You know, I had a piano, an upright piano, we'd play it, and all these great musicians would jam, you know. And then the next day, we'd carry on, and the kids from the neighborhood would come to our home, into my kitchen. And this was a trick that I used to use. I would receive my neighbors' kids, and then we would teach the kids, and the kids would enjoy being there. And that meant that our neighbors couldn't complain about the noise because their own kids were part of the fun. You know what I'm saying?
Good idea.
But anyway, so then, and then it became called Eugene's Kitchen, and Jude Kelly of South Bank Center, before she left, when in 2008, when the Royal Festival Hall reopened and my piece played there with the London Philharmonic Orchestra called Excite, I composed the piece that was played to reopen the festival hall after 2 years of closure. Jude Kelly, who was then the artistic director, heard about, she found an email came to her vicariously, indirectly, about Eugene's Kitchen, about the Arts Council regarding my kitchen as Eugene's Kitchen. And then she wanted that idea, she wanted to take it to the festival hall because the restaurant downstairs didn't need to make a profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, down right under the ballroom, under the festival hall, there's you know where they have, where they sell the food and all of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, in the stalls outside. But inside, the same level, you know, that there's a restaurant there, the full length, you know, that restaurant, before the festival hall reopened, that restaurant was available. And because the artistic director was someone like Jude Kelly, who's famous for being creative and left field, you know, and being alternative and radical, and being interested in developing youths, and in particular women, you know, uh, uh, she then was the boss, and she just put two and two together and thought, because you have Giraffe and all those other the chains, you know, the other restaurants, what do you call them? You
Yeah.
know, like the
Yeah.
chains, the rest.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a word for it. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, who make the money to keep the place going, you know, because they pay rent. So
Yeah.
that restaurant didn't need to make money. So she came up with this idea. She called me and told me she wants a meeting with me. And then I told her that I'll have the meeting with her so long as I can be accompanied by this very left-wing Scottish, he's dead now, Scottish chef who used to work at Boar Place in Kent on a farm, and used to cook food. You could cook food, like if there were 20 dietary requirements, he would cook 20 different dishes, you know, for vegans, for this, for that, for everybody. And he was the guy who used to cook food when I did workshops on the farm. So I brought him to a meeting to meet Jude Kelly, and there was the three of us, and she took us to the kitchen and right around the place. And my friend, the chef, this radical chef, passed it. He, you know, ticked all his boxes. He said, yay, it's good. And my dream was that I was going to run workshops because I love cooking. I improvise. I cook from the same experience of my mother cooking for the hordes, for the masses in my township. So I was going to use the kitchen to have open mic setups where we cook food with young people. This was before, in fact, Jamie Oliver's idea came from that, because they're connected as well. This is long before he came up with the thing. I had that idea at South Bank Center, and then we were going to start that. And then she had a meeting. She brought me to a meeting with finance director, you know, and he, in his pinstripe suit, said, yes, we passed the project. We don't need to make a profit. So
Amazing.
everything there was going to be free. You understand me?
Yeah.
But something happened, and that fell through, you know. So my workshop techniques, then, if you like, are inspired largely by growing up with.
Yeah. All of this together.
Yeah, you know, I
together.
Exactly, you know. And then when I then fled into exile because of my work with Steve Biko, I'm the guy who drew the Black Power fist. You know, the fist that says, you know, the Black Power fist, the salute. I drew the first one in South Africa, the original one, with inks that my father had imported from England. They call Winsor and Newton, you know, very beautiful inks, different colors, but I used black to draw that. And that I did in the presence of Steve Biko, because I was meant to study medicine, and that's how I met Steve Biko, because he was at medical school in Durban. And then I ended up being the getaway driver for the movement, because I started driving at 9 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father taught me to drive at 9 in those big American cars, when my father made enough money and then he could buy cars cash, like the cars that you have in Cuba, you know, the famous old-fashioned American cars, you know, Ford Fairlane, Buick, Chrysler, Chevrolet, you name them, you know, the big ones, mostly 8-cylinder, V8, you know, powerful engine. So at 9 years, I would sit on a British Petroleum can, a gallon, the old measure, you know, a gallon tin of oil, empty. And then my pillow from my bed, I'd take my pillow and put on the gallon and sit on the seat. And I would look through the steering wheel, because the giant steering wheel, and I was so small, I had to look through the steering wheel to see the road. And then my father would sit, my father slept no more than 3 hours a night, because he was a phenomenal guy, didn't get sick, didn't take drugs, just an unbelievable guy. He just happened to be that kind of person, you know? And then when I was driving, then when he was teaching me, he would sit on the left. They were right-hand drive, like in England, not left-hand like in America. He would sit on the left and he'd read the daily newspaper, and then I would drive. And then he would tell me off. He was a hard taskmaster, one of the toughest teachers of my life, but I value him because he taught me another level of sharpness, of being in tune with myself. He would say, there was nothing but potholes in the road because there was no tar. It was just soil, sand, earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you at the start of my story that it rained tumultuously. So there were big potholes, big holes in the road. And my job was to avoid the four tires, the four wheels of a four-wheel car falling into the holes. And that, I'm telling you, my brother, Fernando, those were my first lessons in rhythm technique. Because listen to this, I would drive the car and make sure that no wheel goes into the hole. That like between the two holes, like two pistons, cylinders for the pistons in a car, there's the ridge between the two circles, like the two bubbles, the two speaking bubbles behind you, in the earth. Yeah, I know they overlap like a Venn diagram. So imagine if they were pulled apart, there's that, the negative space between them. So that's the only place where I would make the wheel go. So I would have to anticipate that in advance. I would have to calculate in advance that by in so many meters, after so many seconds, the right wheel is going to be there. So I would manage, when I knew how I knew I was successful was that my dad did not open his mouth once to complain. Then I knew that it's going fine, So then listen to this. So a car that's not automatic, that's got gear shift. You've got the accelerator on the right. In the middle, you've got the brake, and on the left you've got the clutch. To change the gears. Yeah, I'm imagining an old-fashioned car because my last car was automatic here in England. Now, the negotiation between those three levers, those three pedals, and the gear shift, for me, is an art of dance, of balance, of rhythm. So those were my first, if you like, experiences. I'm known in the world through my work. You probably know that, but I play the Udu, I do various things, I teach, I do master classes in rhythm. I'm known in my world as a master of polyrhythm. At some point I could have, my 2 feet, my right hand, my left hand, those are 4. And then the 5th one was my mouth. I could have 4 different tempi and 5 different tempi where I chant like this side, and then on my right hand on a bongo or anything or conga, I'll have another one, this side another one. So different rhythms, different time signatures, but also different tempi, and that's after intense meditation and yoga and my jogging. And I used to be like a madman in Clapham Common, where people would see me carrying shakers. And then I'd be singing flute lines. I used to play the flute, the concert flute. I'd be playing arpeggios and doing like chord sequences with my mouth whilst playing different rhythms in each shaker whilst jogging, in Clapham Common. And they just look at me, the regulars, walking their dogs, as a mad guy, So then when I came here, I started running classes. When I came into exile, the first thing I did was, I was very poor. I had a bamboo flute, an Indian flute, and I would walk around Brixton and Oval, southwest London, where I came into exile. And I was very, very hungry and very poor, And then my partner would be at home, and I'd be just looking, and it took me 9 years to get legal status in this country during Margaret Thatcher's years. That's another story, very interesting story. But I don't know if we have time for that. But in the meantime, if I may just say, what happened was, I would walk the streets and do my yoga and my meditation. And then I found Oval House Theatre in South London, across the road from the Oval Cricket Ground. And that's where Pierce Brosnan, the actor, the James Bond guy, that's where Pierce Brosnan used to go as a wayward teenager. He was a very naughty teenager. That's where he went and studied theatre, and they sorted his mind out. And so to this day, every year, every Christmas, he'll be doing that soon. He goes there in his lovely fleecy, his mohair long coat and his Bentley. And he goes and gives money because he's thanking them forever for having saved his life, if you like, Oh, wow. That's also where the gay guy, the Bronski beat guy, the communards, Jimmy Somerville, I helped him come out when he was gay, before he came out with my first workshops, but I'll come to that. So I used to go there and sit in the kitchen, near the kitchen, and drum on the table, play my flute, and then put my flute down and do my paradiddles with my hands, like my Udu technique, you know, my funny finger techniques on the table. And then black young youths, mostly black, sometimes white, but mostly young black youths from the very dangerous council estate from across the road from the theater used to come and harass the gay guys who ran the kitchen and cooked beautiful food and made lovely salads. And they'd call them batiman, which is a derogatory term, you know, like West Indians would use in a condescending, you know, in a derogatory way towards, as a reference to people who are gay, you know, and they would call them that, and then knives would come out and they'd threaten them, you know. And the only time that they didn't threaten the kitchen staff or the theater goers was when they came in and they heard my drumming on the table. So this is the last part of the story, because this is exactly how I got to do workshops and remind me the word workshop, lest I forget. So they would come, and then the table was a long table that sat six, 2 chairs on the long, that sat 8, three chairs on the long side and 3 on the opposite, that's 6, and then 1 on each end, that's 8 chairs, 8 seats. I was occupying 1, you know, sort of in the middle of the table or the corner, I don't remember, and I'd play and do my techniques. The kids would gather around me. 7 of them would sit on each available chair. And they came so many, sometimes there'd be a dozen of them, there'd be 6, sometimes 7, sometimes 8, sometimes 10. And whoever doesn't have a seat would stand behind one of their mates close to me. And I ended up, they were fascinated by what I'm doing. So I deconstructed for them what I was doing on the table. So already, even before I knew the use of the word workshop, I was doing a workshop unwittingly. So I organized the parts, I told them what to do, and then I'd do polyphonic parts, I'd get them to chant, you know, 7, 8 here, 6, 8 there, 5, whatever, you know. And then they would go home eventually, and there'd be peace. And the days would continue like that. One day, a man who's sadly in hospital right now, and I'm hoping he doesn't have COVID, he's at St. Thomas's, called Alfie Pritchard. At Oval House, he was the man responsible for the youth work, the youth program. You know, the youth educational program, like you had those things and like you still have all over London in the various boroughs. You know, there was always youth work. You remember in the early days, it was called youth work, you know, right. So he was responsible for the program at Oval House Theatre, which had rooms that organized workshops. So it was Oval House Theatre / Community Center, the same place where Pierce Brosnan was healed. And that's also where the Black Panther Party, the Black Panther Party from London, the Brixton ones, used to come and hide when the police were chasing them. Many stories. This is before my time. So anyway, one day, this man, Alfie Pritchard, who runs the workshops, who looks after the youth, happens to pass behind my back. He touches me gently and says, "Hi, my friend. I like what you're doing. Would you like to do a workshop here? Would you like to do a workshop here?" And then he saw my face go funny. I had shock in my face. And then he wondered, and he sat down. He says, "Oh, you're right." And he sat down, and I told him that I don't do workshops. And then my only understanding of the word workshop then was 2 forms of it. One was a place where you panel beat cars, where you fix cars, you know, a workshop, where you know, like a mechanic's workshop. The other one was a very negative and frightening use of the term. During my time with Steve Biko in the Black Consciousness movement, if you were caught by the people with Steve Biko and myself and the people in the movement, the freedom movement, in the liberation struggle, if you like, if you were caught as being a collaborator, as a spy, you understand me, as an informer, planted on and working on behalf of the racist regime, you understand that concept? You know, you're a sellout. You are infiltrating, you know, Eugene and Sig and you know, and whoever else and Fernando, who are doing beautiful workshops, but you're coming in to kind of infiltrate and then take intelligence that will work against us. if you were caught, you were workshopped. And I don't
Ah,
need to explain what that means. You were reconstituted,
yeah.
physically.
Oh my
So I
God.
said to him, no. And then he laughed. He appreciated what I was saying. And then he held me and embraced me and he laughed. He says, no. And then he explained to me what a workshop was. So now, at some point in England, I was once the highest paid workshop leader. I don't know if you know that. At my height, there was no one who earned more than I. And what's Sig's husband's name again? I'm just forgetting now.
Oh,
Oh gosh,
cool.
Paul Griffiths, all of them. Many people that Fraser Trainer. Fraser Trainer. You know that name?
Yeah.
I think I told you, I taught him, he learned from me. All the techniques, the clapping things he does, he got from me, during my
Right.
Sinfonietta days, And so, uh, uh, at some point through the London Sinfonietta, who heard of me through Oval House, I then became the top workshop leader in this country. And the other person we were the most famous with is a composer called Nigel Osborne. And it
Yeah.
happens that we have the same birthday. You know that name? Yeah.
I met him.
So
I met him once. I did a workshop with him about the
okay.
rocks
So
and
Nigel used to be called the White Eugene, and I used to be called the Black Nigel. That was a joke, and stuff. So how come so then of course I did my first workshops there, and then I created the Oval House Music School, and I became the director of the music school, and the rest is history. And I had Courtney Pine, Steve Williamson, Dudu Pukwana, you name many big names, Eddie Parker, many names of Jan Hendrikse. That's where I taught Jan Hendrikse, Tunde Jegede, all of them, and then they took a lot of my ideas and went to Guildhall, but I don't want to jump there yet. But so just to finish, what I'm saying is, I did my workshops there, and then, but before I started doing the workshops, one day at that table, before I did the workshop, before the guy Alfie came to me, one of the gay guys in the kitchen where they used to have a hatch, and as soon as they hear the young black guys are around, they would pull the hatch down and lock the door because they were scared of them. So this day the hatch was open, the kids were no more harassing them. One of the gay guys brought a Portuguese chicken dish that is actually a mix of Portuguese and South African dish. A chicken dish, beautiful, piled high, and then put it down, and then touched me on the shoulder, and then on the side of that was salad, a green salad, also piled high. And he said, "We want to thank you for what you are doing for us." And I genuinely did not know what he was talking about then, and I just left it there. But then later I realized, because
realized.
the work I was doing, so then my workshop, brother, is inspired by my home, my mother, my father, the safety, the refuge, there, and of course the all-night singing under the giant fig tree where I used to steal and jump out of the window, and my mother wouldn't know because she's worried about my safety, in the moonlight, hearing the chanting. So my chanting that I'm famous for, that whole technique of polyrhythmic stuff that is used in all the workshops. I mean, Sig knows that story, is coming from there. So if you like, I blame my mother, Yeah.
For all of this.
All of
That's
Yeah.
amazing, Eugene. Like it's amazing how when we talk to people like you, and we want to know about this journey and this other journey and this other route that you took somehow sometime in your life, but then when you give this whole big picture of everything, I don't need anymore, like it's everything in there: the activism, the music, the polyrhythm, the
Yeah.
singing, the chanting, the human connection. Everything is in what you just told me, and I think, like, this is you don't need to tell me much more, to be honest, because everything is in there. Of course, it would be great to hear from you, in a more kind of boring, I would say, way at this time of this conversation, in terms of like specific projects that you're proud of, that you've been doing, especially in hard times like
Yeah.
this, with
Yeah.
lockdown in the UK, and all around the world, basically. But just to kind of know, maybe, like, you told us a lot, how you became this workshop leader in a good way, the workshop in a good way. uh, but um, but uh, but knowing a little bit more about you know, like specific projects that you
Yeah,
highlight, the highlights of that you would like to tell us about, but also about this late kind of 2020 crazy times. I know you've been doing lots of
sure.
projects and poetry and music, and can you tell us a little bit about all of that
Yeah,
in this? But I want you to say it in this way that you just say, where you say everything out of order, and at the end we know
lovely.
everything without knowing a specific.
Thank you, brother. Oh, that's so beautiful, brother. Thanks for liberating me, for freeing me up. First of all, before I even start, I have to take this moment to thank you, Fernando, because your vibe, your smile, your ebullient smile on the
Ah,
face, on the screen, all of that is very powerful and inspiring to me, because it really frees me up and makes me even more of who I am. So
thank
thanks for
you.
that. But
I think I would say
just
the
before
same.
I tell you about thank you, brother. Thank you. Yeah. Just before the 2020 stuff, the lockdown stuff, and I've got a lot of interesting things to say. I just remembered as I was talking, as I came to the end of that whole, story, and this has Nigel Osborne involved as well. There's a very, very pertinent story, and I'll keep it brief, that I have to tell you that is really the most powerful experience, if you like, of my work as a workshop leader. If I had to, if I was forced, to choose one moment. So what happened was, for 1997 and 1998, for those 2 years, I was what was called the Director of Music Development of the Pavarotti Music Center in Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah. At
Yeah,
that time, after the war, that inter-ethnic horrible war, where you may know that where the term ethnic cleansing was born. The term ethnic cleansing was coined during that war, because that's what they were doing. They were ethnically cleansing. And then, of course, it went to Rwanda and wherever else, on the planet. But that's the first time that the phrase was used like that, And at that time, Mostar, the town of Mostar, which has an ancient history with the ancient bridge, the story of the bridge, that was built, the Turkish bridge that was built, that was designed by a Turkish architect slash poet slash mathematician, a great mind who designed that bridge. And the way the wedges, the bridge is an arc, yeah? You know the bridge I'm talking about, yeah? It stood for hundreds of years
yeah, I think
until
so.
until
Yeah,
it was bombed during the war.
yeah,
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 it's a very
yeah.
beautiful bridge, and the arc of the bridge, the arc of it, that part right at this here has a peak, where it's not completely circular, like a CD. That, if you're just looking at the arc of the bridge crossing the river Neretva, the green, emerald green river, beautiful river.
Yeah.
Right at the middle of it, right at the center, here, there's like an apex, and that's an incredibly clever mathematical join, and they used egg shells and horsehair crushed as the adhesive, And if you look at, my kids are trained, my kids are educated at home, and my son is very interested in maths and physics and stuff. And a couple of years ago, when it was my turn to give a lesson, I used that story of the bridge as part of the lesson, because he was very sharp. Because what happened was, I was trying to fry eggs for the family, and one egg had broken when my son put it in our wooden egg holder, the little egg compartment, and it was hard to clean it out. I had to take the egg holder and put it on the table, get a chisel, screwdrivers, hammer. We couldn't, because the albumin and the yolk, the mixture egg, the egg white is one of the strongest adhesives in the world, and so I got into the science of that. But anyway, that's by the by. That same bridge was bombed and terrible, and then it was rickety with cables and stuff for many years after the war. When I went there to work as director of music development, employed by War Child, the British charity War Child, which had its original office in Camden. The original founder, the co-founder of War Child was David Wilson. And he was encouraged to employ me through a recommendation by Nigel Osborne, because Nigel was already going there during the war and just after the war. He was one of those guys and taking egg shakers and food and helping, you know, there. But they all hit like a deadlock when it came to one particular guy. There were two guys, they were friends. The one I'm going to talk about, I'll mention second, who's a crucial inlet into my story of my most powerful work. This, the second one is Theo. Theo is a tall guy. His father was killed. He's Bosnian Muslim. And one hot day he was sitting on the steps, or just on the step of the front door of his home. His mother and father were upstairs. Two Croat, heavily armed, heavy booted soldiers came in and asked for his father. And he just innocently, as a young teenager, just said, pointed upstairs. The next thing he heard, he knew was his father, they cut off his testicles and penis, and they shoved it in his mouth and blew his head off. And his mother witnessed all this, and she then just lost her mind and just slobbered, you know, from that day onwards. Theo was sitting with his younger brother, whose name I forget, who still has a chain, a hippie chain that I gave him, beads that I gave him, you know, when I first went to Bosnia. They went up and saw their parents like that, and Theo lost his speech. I brought his speech back, long story short, myself and the wife of the director of War Child, Anne Ayla, who did yoga, and I also did yoga. So through yoga, meditation, and the djembe, I used to practice unbelievably. I was a top djembe player those years. I would do my 101 finger press ups where at the Pavarotti Music Center after it was built through 7 million Deutschmark of Pavarotti's money made from the concerts that he held every year in his hometown Modena in Italy, called Pavarotti and Friends, which Michael Jackson did, Prince did, you know, the Spice Girls, you know, Candle in the Wind, whatever his name is, Elton John, you know, Bono, everybody. Yeah, they all did that, you know, and the money started, the money was used from Decca Records, his label. All the profits were given to War Child. And then they were given, the money was used to make music centers. Another one was going to be in Liberia and elsewhere and what have you, but then Pavarotti died, you know, at some point, and then there was some embezzlement of the funds. But Theo got his speech back through the work I did with him.
Amazing.
With the djembe and meditation and yoga. Okay, but park that one. It's too long a story, but the real main one I wanted to tell you what is the other guy then. All right. Oha, O-H-A. But his name is Orhan, but for short, and his like nickname is Oha. Mashlo, unbelievable guy, taller than myself. Slender, tall, like what's the guy who did those Rambo, not Schwarzenegger, the other guy, the Rambo films, I'm forgetting his name now.
Sylvester Stallone.
Sylvester Stallone, yes. He's a tall version of Sylvester, facially exactly, but tall and slim, where, you know, Sylvester is more like this. And he was a naughty guy at school, he had switchblade, he was a genius in maths, and they couldn't understand him at school. So Nigel recommended that I be given a job, that I be brought to Bosnia, because there are some things that they can't manage to do. One of them was this guy. He was in a refuge, like what do you call when kids are homeless and oh gosh, kids without parents, and they an orphanage, sorry.
Yeah.
So he was at an orphanage during the war. At 13 years old, he was the youngest fighter on the front line of that Bosnian war. 13 years.
Wow.
He survived the war, was very famous. His father dispossessed him, and his grandmother lived on the west side, or east side, I'm forgetting which is which side now, but on the other side, across the river, the same Neretva River, across the river from the Pavarotti Center, where mostly Croats are now, since the ethnic cleansing, you know, when families were together and all the three, factions, you like, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks were intermarried and what have you, were friends, they went to school together, played in bands, football, what have you. Suddenly, they were separated, as you know. So on the side of where the Pavarotti Center, it was mostly Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, but other people as well. I'm talking about now after the cleansing, so-called cleansing. So Oha couldn't visit his grandmother or any members of his family across the river. And the bridge was this rickety bridge. It's in my memoirs, a story about it, with cables, The same bridge where they used to do the famous diving. The Bosnians were the most famous. They would dive like birds off the bridge into the river where there were rocks and they would avoid them, Some are still diving now, even though there are big rocks from the old bridge. Some were salvaged to make the new bridge with Saudi Arabian money, with all sorts of other conditions, but that's another story. So Oha was in the orphanage, and still as a teenager, he was brought to me at the Pavarotti Music Center. Long story short, I got his speech back. I trained him, I gave him my best. I was top djembe player, and my djembe was always one of those best, like the djembes from Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire, the ones that a lot of African guys who are the top djembe players who play in the UK or France, or like the ones, with the different colored ropes and really like iron hitting through the ozone layer, I had one of those. And I had the straps. And one day, we're at a theater performance near some peach trees in the bombed out Mostar. He was sitting in the front row of an audience, shaking, showing those signs of trauma still,
Oh my God.
I gave him my drum. I played a solo. I was performing solo for them. And then I walked to him with my djembe as an apron, with the straps across my neck, like Mm-hmm. And then I improvised, and I brought my improvisation down to a call and response, where it was obvious that the space that was left quiet was for him to fill with an answer in my conversation.
Yeah.
And after a brief moment, he just answered. And then I played again, and he answered. I called again, he responded. I made it more complex, he evolved. And then I indicated without talking with my head for him to stand up. I moved back, he stood up opposite me. I pushed my drum with my belly against his belly. So that it was a fulcrum, you understand the concept? So we didn't need hands, it was balance, gravity wouldn't pull it down. And then I freed my hands to take my straps off me, and I crossed them over and put them over his head and shoulders and under his arms. And then I went like that, indicated for him to take my space, and then I sat on his space. And he played his first djembe of his life. He owns my djembe to this day. Fast forward, I then taught him, he could speak, he could dance. He became my assistant. He was my #1 apprentice in Bosnia. He became the most sought after hand drummer in the whole Balkan region through that. Today, he's the director of the Pavarotti, of the rock school in Mostar, that operates out of the Pavarotti Center. So a complete movement into the stars. And you can find him online. So the final thing about him, that he's the guy, if you've seen the video on my timeline on Facebook, that's been shared many times, it's whatever it's called, something Power of the Drum or something, Healing Drum, it's called, Healing Drum. He's the guy that I pick up, and then he goes and sits down and he takes a djembe, and I'm playing a double bass, I'm playing my double beat drum, my dundun, and I take a guy very forcefully, if you like, because that force, that power, we chant, oh ha, we chant, and it's on a 6/8 rhythm, you can find it on my timeline. That's a very shareable video. That is the guy I'm talking about. So that was my most powerful workshop ever. But nowadays, in COVID-19, there are a couple of projects I'm doing. One of them, as you may have seen, I've been writing up until just 3 or 4 days ago, because I had technical problems and I had to stop. I wrote a poem a day from the beginning of the pandemic, literally without fail. Every day I wrote a poem, and I post them on those yellow background pages, And 2 projects evolved out of that. One is a violinist from Wales, from Cardiff, who knows me from way back from the 80s, Sianette Jones, lives on a street in a little village on the fringes of Cardiff, and they paint writings like the quotes from Rumi, the great mystic, Sufi poet. And the first time she wrote my stuff, she painted my stuff she painted a quote of mine there one day, and then alerted me on her blog and then on Facebook, and I was excited. And then a couple of times more, 2 or 3 times more, she painted my poetry from Facebook, painted, with brush and paint, colorfully, on the wall to inspire the people. It's a street wall that is known for inspiring people in the community. And my poems in particular were inspiring the people to cope with the distress of coronavirus lockdown.
Yeah.
So, that's an incredibly beautiful project for me. So my words, if you like, were inspiring people to find hope in their dealing with COVID. The second part, which is a twin project, the second project, which is my greatest ever, and I'm saying this for the record, my greatest ever one-to-one collaboration. You have one-to-one collaborations, say between a poet and a musician, or a flautist and a drummer, or whatever, a painter and a poet, I've done many of those, and I've done all kinds of collaborations for decades, all my life. But the most powerful one of my entire life, the one that is the most meaningful and that just hits the highest level, is the one I'm just about to explain to you. So there's a woman called Estelle Kokot, and she's on Facebook. She's a white Afrikaner woman. And Afrikaner, if you know anything about South African history, you'll know that she's part of the tribe, of the people, of the ethnic group that were the oppressors during apartheid, You understand me? The ones who concocted the racist ideology of apartheid, apartness, separateness. And they even try to confuse us and say separate but equal when things were getting harder, for them to handle, until they had to move out and accept, Mandela, if you like, and free Mandela. But Estelle is a jazz pianist and jazz singer of very, very high note from South Africa, living in the UK for a number of years now. She lives in London, in North London. I'm in South London. She was very inspired by my poems. Before we knew each other, we've not even met physically. The closest we've got is to, like you and I now, even though you and I know each other from before, but it's through Zoom or Skype or whatever, Mm-hmm. And she was moved by my poems to such a point that she decided to put them to music. So she started one without telling me. The next thing I know, she's sending me a message. I cried like a baby. Unbelievable interpretation of my poem.
Amazing.
She's a pianist and a singer. Unbelievable. Beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm not just talking about a singer-songwriter kind of style where you put music to lyrics and what have you. It's deep. It's on another level completely, And then we started talking, and she did another poem and another poem. Now we've got enough material for an album. So we're going to be releasing an album, a duo album.
Listen to it.
Of coronavirus poetry and music. So that is my, my heaviest current project,
Amazing. Eugene, I think we way over time here in terms of internet attention spam. But this is amazing. Like I could stay talking to you more than a day. I'm sure. I was going to say the whole day, but actually I could just stay listening to your stories forever. This is amazing. Like I can't even start thanking you so much. Thank you very, very much for telling all these amazing stories about all your very different experiences, and so many variety of experiences, but all, as I said before, like they all tell me musical stories, poetry stories, like and human connection, and like they all tell the same story basically, but with different characters and different scenarios, but they all show this amazing connection that you bring, and the smile and the poetry and everything is one when we look at you. Thank you so much for your inspiration, Eugene. Yeah, very, very
Thank
special.
You, my brother.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, my brother. Do you mind if I just, can I do a screen capture, please? It's just so beautiful. Will it allow me? Thank you, brother. Thank you, Fernando.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.